Thank you.
Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That's why he was also called Edom.
Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I am about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore on oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright.
Very well read. Thank you, Oliver. Now, you may remember last time I was here, I told you about a man called Mike Sadler who could find his way around the desert by relying on something that didn't move. The desert, the sand was always moving, always getting blown away, but he relied on the stars. He could direct people and himself around the desert by the stars. He could rely on what was immovable, what was the same. He could rely on that. Well, this time I want to tell you about a person called Steve Birkinshaw. Now, I dare say that probably none of you have ever heard of him. Maybe someone might surprise you. Now, he had a hobby. Can you tell from the picture what his hobby might be, the youngsters? What is he doing in the picture? Yes? Sorry? Not quite exploring, but it does look like it with a map in his hand, doesn't it? Yes? Kind of hiking. It's a bit more than that. He's sort of fell running. You're on the right kind of lines. So his hobby was, he liked to go in races where he'd run up and down hills, run up and down mountains. That's what he liked to do in his spare time. And I think it's others that we know who enjoy doing similar things. That's what he did. He was a fell runner, and he's very good at it. He's very good at it indeed. And in 2014, he took on a challenge. Now, you see, there are 214 peaks in the Lake District, fells or mountains, which a man called Alfred Wainwright, he's written a pictorial guide on how to get up and down each one of the 214 hills, fells in the Lake District. A lot of them, 214. Steve Birkinshaw's challenge was to break an existing record. And the record was to run to the top of each of these 214 fells in 7 days. I mean, the very thought of it makes me want to sit down and put a kettle on, to be really honest with you. To run up each one of these in just 7 days. Now, obviously, much was needed to be done to get ready for it. And he's a very fit person anyway. He took with him 7 pairs of trainers. Each one was different because of the different ground he was running on. When it's rocks and that, you get certain trainers. If it's loose ground, different trainers, grass, different trainers. 7 pairs of trainers he took with him for this big, big challenge. Excuse me. But he said it was in the planning that also took many, many hours, the planning of it. He knew exactly what he had to do to get to the top of 214 in 7 days. But what route should he take? Which order should he take the summits in? I mean, you see up in the North Fells, you can probably do that in I don't know, I couldn't, but maybe you could do it in a day or something, and you've got the Far Eastern Fells. Which order was he going to do each of the summits and do it within the 7 days? What was the best way of doing it? What was his plan? What was his plan to reach each of these summits? And he said he spent hours looking at maps, seeking advice. Those who had done it before, what route did you take? What direction should I go in? Now, did he do it? Yes, he did. And he completed it in 6 days and 13 hours. And I have to say, let's put the record straight. It has been broken a couple of times since 2014. Once was by a young lady called Sabrina, which is good for her. And I think the last time, if I've got it right, was in 2022. This is by an American called John Kelly, who remarkably did it in 5 days, 12 hours, 14 minutes and 42 seconds, to be exact. And it was a long way. And the total ascent was higher than Everest, apparently, as well. So planning was so very, very important, but he managed to do it. David, who wrote many of the Psalms, And as we read earlier, he said in Psalm 139, verse 16, all the days ordained for me, or all the days planned for me, were written in your book, in God's book, before one of them came to be. And for those of us here who know God through faith in the Lord Jesus, we can be confident that God has a plan for your life, for my life. It's already been decided. God knows the best plan, the best route, if you like, for your life. The route for your life is in the hands of the great planner, whether we are the youngest here or whether we are the oldest. Now, over some of the future all-age services, we're going to be looking at the life of Jacob. In actual fact, he's one of the few people in the Bible where we're told about his birth, but also told about his death as well. There's not lots of people we know both of those. There's some in the New Testament. We think of Jesus. We think of John the Baptist. We think in the Old Testament of Moses. And there's a few, but it's not masses. But Jacob is one of those people we know about his birth, but also we know about his death as well. And I've lost myself here. I do apologise. Hang on. That's right. So we're looking at the life of Jacob. And as we start thinking about Jacob, we begin to learn something about the plans of God. We can learn about the plans of God as we look through, particularly the beginning of the life of Jacob. And as we look at the early part of Jacob's life, I want us to see three things. Firstly, excuse me, God's plans may be unexpected, but don't be afraid. Secondly, God's plans are always best, so keep on trusting him. Then thirdly, God's plans may need waiting for, so be patient. So firstly, God's plans may be unexpected, but don't be afraid. Genesis 25, verses 19 to 28, we read earlier. Isaac, as we read, was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. They're in verse 20. And he prayed on behalf of Rebekah because they were unable to have children. God heard his prayer and Rebekah became pregnant. And as the babies grew inside her, they began to jostle with each other. And Rebekah began to question. She said, why is this happening? What's going on? What is happening here? So she went to God herself. She prayed to God. And God replied and shared something of his plan with her. In Genesis 25, verse 23, we read, 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Well, that wasn't expected. Normally, the younger one serves the older one. It's the older one that has all the privileges. It's the older one that has all the responsibility. It's the older one that becomes the leader. He is the firstborn, not the other way round. That wasn't expected. Well, verse 24 tells us that when the time came for her to give birth, she had twins. Now, the way it's written makes you wonder, did she realise she was having twins or not? The way it's written here in the Bible, it seems that maybe she didn't fully understand that she was having twins. Maybe that was the time when she finally realised there were twins inside her. So maybe that was unexpected as well. Because in the Bible, we don't read of many twins being born, but here's one, twins that were born. Now, these non-identical twin boys, they were certainly very, very different from each other. The firstborn was born with a lot of hair, we're told, and so he was called Esau, which means hairy. He also had red colour skin. The skin had more of a red colour to it. And so he was called Edom. Edom means red. So in the Bible, we see Esau can sometimes be called Edom. He's hairy and he's red. The second-born was Jacob. And in verse 26, he was born grasping holding the hand. Sorry, getting someone up here. He was born grasping hold of Esau's heel. So when Esau was born, Jacob was there holding on to the heel of Esau. And the word Jacob means he grasps the heel. It can also mean deceiver. It's like someone who grabs, someone who grasps for something. So Jacob, that was what he was called. Esau loved the outdoors, and he was a skillful hunter. And he was his dad's favourite. Imagine that. Parents having favourites. Terrible. While Jacob was a quiet man who stayed at home. And he was his mum's favourite. You see, sometimes God's plans may be a little unexpected. They are not what we were anticipating, something we didn't see coming. They may be different from our plans. But God is the master planner, and he knows the best route. Sometimes God's plans make us happy. This is great. I wasn't expecting this. This is great. I'm happy. Sometimes God's plans make us sad. I'm not ready for his plans for our life. But, and though it's sometimes a lot easier to say than to actually do, we don't need to be fearful. Whether they make us sad, whether they make us happy and pleased, we don't need to be fearful. We're told in Isaiah chapter 41 and verse 13, "For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, 'Do not fear, I will help you.'" But how can we be confident of this? How can we be confident that God will take hold of our right hand and that he will help us? How do we know that for sure? We're told in Psalm 138 verse 8, "The Lord will fulfill his purpose for me." God will fulfill his plan for me. And that word purpose also means those things that concern me. So he will fulfill those things that concern me, the purpose he has for me. And what does it say next? "Your love, O Lord, endures forever." Then he goes back to say, "Do not abandon the works of your hands." So here in that verse, here is the psalmist saying, God will fulfill what concerns me, his purpose and his plan for my life. In actual fact, he won't abandon that. And why? Well, his love endures forever. That's the heart of God. His love endures forever. We know he'll have tight hold of our right hand. We know he'll help us because his love for us endures forever. There may be times when we don't understand the plans of God. They are not what we would have chosen. They've come out of the blue, but we can always trust the heart of God. His love endures forever. Secondly, God's plans are always best, so keep trusting him. Chapter 25, verses 29 to 34. We're told there in verse 20, "Once when Jacob was cooking." Now, Jacob is at home where he likes to be, and he's cooking. Esau had been out, but not just simply out. He'd been out. He'd been out in the open country, and it's where he liked to be. He's been out for some time, and he's come back, verse 29, famished. Which is interesting because we're told he was a skillful hunter, and we're told later on he's quite capable of cooking food. So if he was that hungry, why didn't he catch and cook something for his dinner? Anyway, he didn't, and he comes in and he is famished. Now, the word Esau uses here is not describing someone who is a little bit peckish, but it comes from the word meaning faint or exhausted. So Esau returns and he's exhausted. That's the word he uses. I'm really hungry. And as he comes in, what does he smell but the food Jacob is cooking? Now, I wonder if you find smells of certain food makes you feel even more hungry. How about if you youngsters, do you smell food that's being cooked at home or something and you think, oh, I feel even more hungry now? I mean, for me, I think smelling of bread being cooked, does that sort of, or chips, dare I say it? Smell of chips? You go past the chippy, you can smell the chips. Well, this is Esau. He's hungry. He's just come in from being out and he can smell this nice food. And he says, quick, let me have some of that red stew. So being a loving brother, does Jacob say, sure, help yourself, have as much as you like. Oh, can I get you some drink as well? No, he doesn't do that, does he? He sees a chance here, does Jacob, and he says, first, sell me your birthright. All the rights and privileges you have as the firstborn son, give them to me in exchange for some food. Sell it to me for food. And without a second thought, verse 32, he says, look, I'm about to die. What good is a birthright to me? And he sells his birthright for food. Well, we might think, well, that's fair enough. If he's that hungry and he thinks he's about to starve to death, what use is the birthright to Esau? But look at verse 34. We're told here, then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. And the way it's worded there, you think, well, actually, how hungry was he? It appears he revived pretty quick. How starving hungry do you think he really was? Or was it more a case of being impatient? Yeah, he was hungry. I'm not denying he was hungry. He'd been out for a long, long time, and he smelt the food. He thought, well, actually, I'm really starving. No wonder God's plan was to give Jacob, the second-born, the privilege and authority of the firstborn. Who would give it to Esau when he didn't take that responsibility seriously? God's plans are always best. And again, at the end of verse 34, it confirms, Esau was careless about his birthright. That's what the word despised means. He showed contempt for it. He was careless about it. He didn't consider it as a very important thing. See, God's plans are always best, for he knows all things. He knows what we don't know. He understands what we don't understand, and he sees what we don't see. God's plans are always best. But the greatest wonder here is not that God didn't choose Esau. The greatest wonder here is that God chose Jacob. He is indeed a deceiver. He's a liar. There's nothing good in him at all. But God chose Jacob. God is a gracious and a merciful God. Did Jacob deserve to be chosen over and above Esau? Well, no, not at all. Is it only the deserving that Jesus saves and gives eternal life? Do we have to be deserving to receive this from God? Do we have to be deserving to be saved by God? Absolutely not. No one is deserving. Now, please don't let a sense of feeling undeserving hold you back from turning to Jesus as Saviour this morning. Pray to him today. Say sorry for your sin today. If you might think, I've got so many skeletons in the cupboard, if you knew the sort of things I've done, I couldn't possibly, God wouldn't want nothing to do with me. Well, then think about Jacob here. He was deceiving, he was a liar, and God chose him above Esau. We can't make ourselves deserving enough to experience the mercy of God. We need to admit that we don't deserve it. We need to admit that we are sinners before God. There's no other way to know God. And the encouraging thing was, he will not drive you away. He will not cast you off. As John chapter 6 and verse 37 says, whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. Don't think I've got to improve. I've got to be better at least before I can go to God. No, just come exactly as you are. And he will not drive you away. What is holding you back from turning to Jesus today? Maybe today is the day where you take these things and you think through and you turn to Jesus today. Thirdly and finally, God's plans may need waiting for, so be patient. We're moving on now to Genesis 27 and into verse 28. And many years have now gone by. And as Genesis chapter 27 verse 1 says, Isaac is now an old man and he can't see very well. He knows that he will soon die, but he doesn't know when that'll be. It's not necessarily imminent, but he knows he's getting towards the end of his life. So to put things in order before he dies, he calls on his eldest son, Esau. He has a job for Esau to do. He wants Esau to go hunting for food and to cook it just the way he likes it. And then Isaac will give Esau the special blessing from God. The special blessing that only the eldest son will receive. You could say it's something like a sort of prayer, if you like, asking God for God's favour and God's protection. Well, Rebecca was listening and she heard everything. So when Esau goes, she goes and finds Jacob and she speaks to Jacob. Verses 9 and 10 of Genesis 27. Go out to the flock, Jacob, and bring me 2 choice tasty goats so that I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. His mum wants him to pretend to be Esau. But Jacob sees a problem with this. He's nothing like Esau. But wait a minute, haven't they both forgotten something? Hadn't God made his plans very clear before Jacob and Esau had been born? The older would serve the younger. Had Rebekah told Jacob, her favourite son, about God's plans? I would suggest almost certainly, because that may have been a motivation for for Jacob actually manipulating Esau to get that birthright in exchange for some food. But what were they thinking? That God needs their help with this? That God has told them what will happen and they now have the job of making it happen? That God is incapable of completing his own plans? That God isn't fulfilling his plan quick enough? It's all just taking too long. Sometimes we may have to wait for God to fulfill his plans. Yes, God can make all things work together to achieve his purposes, the good and the bad. The good and the bad. God can work all these things together to achieve his purpose and his plan and his will. But sometimes we need to do the next right thing and be patient. Yes, waiting is not to take the place of obedience to God. But sometimes, though we obey, though we do what is good and right and what God tells us to do, we still may need to wait as well. Psalm 27, verse 14 says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." Rebekah and Jacob go through with this con. Rebekah prepares the food and Jacob dresses up in Esau's clothes. He puts on goat skin on his arms to make him feel like Esau, and he goes into his father. Interestingly, his father is not totally convinced. He's getting mixed signals here as Jacob comes in. The voice is Jacob's, but his hands are the hands of Esau. "Are you really Esau?" Isaac says. "I am," Jacob replies. He's lying. He's lying to him. And then Isaac blesses Jacob. There in Genesis 27. Jacob has scarcely left his father when Esau returns and eventually goes into his father. And it doesn't take them long to realise that they have been duped. They've been conned. And in verses 33 and 35 we read, "Isaac trembled violently and said, 'Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed.' When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, 'Bless me, me too, my father.' But he said, 'Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing.'" Rebekah and Jacob took things into their own hands. They weren't concerned about following and obeying God, and they certainly weren't willing to wait. The family is now fractured. Esau wants to kill his brother, so Jacob has to run away. But that's for another time. You see, God's plans may be unexpected, but don't be afraid. He takes hold of your right hand and will help you, for his love endures forever. God's plans are always best, so keep on trusting him. And God's plans may need waiting for, so follow him and wait for the Lord.